Now, John Truby.
First of all, what a great pleasure it is to be here at this world-famous location, Forum des Images. I want to start by asking what I think is the key question that certainly every writer in this room should be asking themselves, which is, do you know what the biggest obstacle is to becoming a successful professional writer in the entertainment business worldwide? The answer is knowing how to create complex plot. Now that probably will surprise you. Certainly this will. The quickest way to become a master of plot is to learn how to execute the genre beats in your particular genre. Hello, everyone. I am John Truby. This is a very happy day for me because my new book has just been released here in France, Anatomie des histoires. It's brought to you by Michel Lafon Publishing, which is the finest publishing house in the world. I can say that. And I believe it. And let me just say real quickly, I've been in Paris for the week. It's been an amazing time. Being part of Michel Lafon Publishing, the work that they have done to try to bring this book to the attention of the French writers has just been amazing. I couldn't be happier to have been here and been part of that. So let's talk about this particular class. I want to highlight some key concepts to show you how to get the most out of this book. Here's my promise. You will learn techniques from l'Anatomie des histoires that you can apply to your story right now, with the goal of getting you into the top 1% of writers worldwide. So let's dig into this question of why do writers face such a massive obstacle in becoming a successful professional writer. Now, before you can solve any problem, you have to know what your goal is. The story industry will pay big money for something they can only get in one place. If they can get it from a lot of people, they're not going to pay for that. Only one place. Therefore, as a writer, your goal is to create your unique story brand so you can sell your stories. As a result, the market has to come to you. Then you are in control and you create your career. Now here's the harsh reality of being a writer in the worldwide story market. You have to get into that top 1%. Why? Because the top 1% makes 90% of the sales. This is true in every medium. Film, television, novels. Now, the biggest problem in popular story today is a lack of plot. And sure enough, what distinguishes this top 1% of storytellers from everyone else is that they know how to create a great plot. And here is the first key point that I want to make this evening. For maximum reader engagement, character is what catches the reader. Plot is what keeps them. Now, why is this? Because over the last 20 years, in every medium, there's been a huge jump in the demand for plot. In other words, you need to be able to surprise the reader with plot twists they've never seen before. That's really hard to do because they've seen everything 100 times. So here's the problem. Almost no one knows how to do that. And that's because there are more techniques that go into plot at the professional level than all the other major writing skills combined. It's also why plot is the most underestimated of all the major skills. Now, when it comes to plot, most writers, because they don't know these techniques, they think, well, I'll just figure it out as I go. Guess what? That doesn't happen. As a result, most 110-page screenplays, and I've read a whole lot of them, most 110-page screenplays have no more than 50 pages of story. Most 300-page novels, no more than 100 pages of story. And that simply will not work at the professional level. Here's a fact. Most writers do not know the techniques that professional writers use. It's a whole different level, a whole different league. And even worse, writers who don't know plot don't know that they don't know plot. They think they know all about story. But the books they've been using have almost no specific professional plot techniques. Yes, they've read about 3-act structure. They've read about the hero's journey. They've read about Save the Cat. And I can tell by a lot of nodding heads you know exactly what I'm talking about. Here's the problem. Those are fine for beginners. But without practical techniques at the professional level, you simply don't have the plot tools you need to write a successful script or novel in today's market. Remember, we are competing to be in the top 1% of writers worldwide, and it is a worldwide market, believe me. Do you really think that these basic level texts that everyone else is using will allow you to separate yourself from everyone else and get to the top? Now, if you're really smart, and I know everyone in this room is, you've read my book, Anatomie du scénario. Why? Because it's the foundation text for writing a great story in every medium, in every genre. It was about how do you write a great story. By the way, I'm happy to say that it is also available from Michel Lafon Publishing, the greatest publishing house in the world. But as valuable and as necessary as that book is, it is not sufficient to get you into the top 1%. For that, you need L'Anatomie des histoires, and let me explain why. It begins with the 3 unwritten rules of the entertainment business worldwide. The only way a writer can gain maximum success is to play by these 3 rules. Most writers don't even know what they are. Rule number 1, the storytelling business is all about buying and selling genres. Now, let's be clear. Genre is a type of plot, like action, love, memoir, crime, science fiction, love story. But even more important, genres are really good stories. They've proven themselves over centuries, sometimes thousands of years, to work with readers. So they're the all-stars of the story world. And that's why the worldwide entertainment business, and by that I mean studios, television networks, publishing houses, and readers, buy and sell genres. So why are genres so useful to you as a writer? Because genres supercharge the plot for whatever your subject happens to be. If you're writing a love story, it supercharges the love story plot. They're the rocket ship by which you boost the plot of your story tenfold. Now, the reason the quickest and best way to master plot is to learn the beats of your genre is because each genre is a plot system. And it's already been worked out. That is an incredible advantage for a writer. That plot system has already been worked out for you, and it's been worked out over hundreds of years. because each genre has 15 to 20 major plot beats that must be in your story. And if they are not in your story, you are not executing the genre properly, and your readers will be very unhappy with you. Now, the problem is that these beats are different for each genre. And they're different for each subgenre. And there are a lot of subgenres. Now, the fact that the ability to create great plot is what distinguishes the top 1% from everyone else, is why the first half of each chapter is crucial to your success. Because the first half of each chapter gives you those 15 to 20 plot beats and tells you exactly how to execute them. Now, today, most stories in every medium are a combination of 2, 3, even 4 genres. It's the old marketing trick, give them 2 for the price of 1. But now it's 3 or 4 for the price of 1. And that's why we have Rule 2 of the worldwide entertainment storytelling business. Popular stories combine 2 to 4 genres. Now notice what happens when you combine 2 genres. You double the number of plot beats in your story, just like that. That's an incredible advantage. In every medium, mixing genres is the key to winning the story game. Here are some popular mixed genre films. Inception, I don't want to break them down for you. Inception, heist and science fiction. Star Wars, myth, fantasy, science fiction, Western. Matrix, science fiction, myth, and action. Little Miss Sunshine, comedy and myth. Avatar, myth, action, and love. Now here's another key point. The necessity of combining 2 to 4 genres is why Anatomie des histoires covers the 14 most popular genres. Believe me, it was a lot of work doing all 14. It covers the 14 most popular genres from which 99% of stories are told worldwide. Either individually, but as I say, most likely a combination of 2, 3, or 4 of them. So no matter what genres you're going to combine in your story, Anatomie des histoires tells you exactly how to do that. And I hope to get into the question and answer, the key to mixing genres, whatever genres you're going to mix. There is a trick to it that you have to know. Now, I mentioned that the first half of each chapter of L'Anatomie des histoires is devoted to the sequence of plot beats in your genre. And as valuable as those beats are, it's the second half of each chapter that's the key to getting you into the top 1%. Now, before I explain why, let me deal with an objection that you might have. You may say, well, I'm not trying to write popular story. I'm not writing Hollywood stories. I want to write great stories. Well, in my opinion, you've just fallen prey to what I believe is the biggest false distinction in storytelling today. The distinction between popular versus great. This is either or thinking, and it will kill your writing. The reason why has to do with rule number 3 of the worldwide entertainment business. And rule number 3 is the most important one of all. To stand out from the crowd, to stand out from everyone else writing your genre, you have to express the genre's unique philosophy of life. This is called transcending the genre. It's the deepest secret of genre, and it makes all the difference in the world. I mentioned that each genre is a unique plot system. What most writers don't know, it's the biggest problem writers have. They don't know that each genre is also a unique theme system. Each genre expresses a philosophy for how to live that is as complete as any expressed by the great philosophers. But it is 10 times more powerful because it's expressed emotionally through story. Again, you may say, well, wait a minute. That's fine for American writers. You have that studio system. But this is France. It doesn't work that way here. To which I would reply, oh, really? Don't you have Netflix? I believe 10.1 million subscribers from France. Don't you have Amazon? Don't you have Studio Canal? Don't you have TF1? For example, Lupin got 80 million worldwide views. It's a combination of crime plus heist. 80 million. 10 years ago, that would have thought to be unheard of, impossible. Americans don't read subtitles. You're not going to get them to read that. Well, how wrong you are. Squid Game, 100 million views from South Korea. Nobody's going to watch a South Korean TV show. How wrong you are. Let me give you another example. Last time I checked, master of mixing and transcending genres in Europe and probably the entire world is Jacques Audiard. What's his technique? Transcend the genre. That encapsulates his whole approach. And as a result, he gets the benefit of genre popularity, but also twists the form to create something original. Let me read you what Audiard has said. I like the stylization of a genre film. It's a way to accelerate the connection with the spectator. Here's the good guy, here's the bad guy. But once the spectator has agreed to get on board, then it's up to the filmmaker to become more subtle and break from the confines of the genre. That's as good a definition of transcending the genre as you will ever see. Now, in L'Anatomie du scénario, I talk about Un Prophète as a transcendent crime film, and it's a great film. Un Prophète was a big breakthrough film for the French system because the writers were able to overcome that false distinction between a genre film and an art film. Instead, they made a genre film that was a work of art. And it had the popularity that genre and only genre can bring. You want some more examples? Sur mes lèvres, crime plus thriller. The Sisters Brothers, anti-Western. Emilia Perez, crime plus musical. Revolutionary. This has never been done before. Poor Things, feminist Frankenstein. Conclave, political thriller, plus detective story, plus drama. This film expresses the power of genre like nothing else. Imagine you're the writer. You're going to write a story for a film about a bunch of cardinals choosing the next pope. Good luck with that. And yet, by adding these genre elements and mixing genres with the thriller and the detective story, it's a hell of a film. Now here are the 14 major genres that make up 99% of all stories told in the world. I want to talk about them in this order because the genres do something that's quite remarkable that I want to explore in this class. And I will divulge the greatest secret of genre at the very end, so you'll have to wait for that. Now, for each genre, I want to tell you, first of all, the aspect of life that each genre explores. For example, horror explores religion. 2, I'm going to tell you what each genre is really about under the surface. And that refers to the life philosophy that allows you to transcend the form and really grab the reader. Third, each genre asks a key question that must be answered by the end of the story. And knowing this key question allows you to apply the life philosophy to the genre story you're telling. And fourth, I will explain a crucial technique to transcend the genre and write a great story in that form. Now, let me give you a caution. I am barely scratching the surface of this book. This thing is huge, this book. But, and I admit it, took me 5 years to write it. My goal today is to give you a clear sense of which genres express the life philosophies that you believe in, so that you can tell a compelling story that only you can tell. It's totally original to you. The first genre we want to explore is horror, which deals with religion. By the way, that is not me. That is not a self-portrait. Now, horror appears to be a story about scaring the audience, and that certainly happens. In fact, it's really about how we confront death and how we deal with the sins of our life that have never been paid for. So you might wonder, why is horror the first genre? It's because it asks the most basic key question, which is, what is human and what is inhuman? Horror occurs because we fear the inhuman entering our world. Or in better horror stories, we fear seeing the inhuman in ourselves. Now, this leads to the first and most important technique for transcending horror. Better horror stories have a structural flip between human and inhuman. In other words, at some point in the story, the monster becomes the hero. And this creature that was terrifying at the very beginning turns out is the most humane character of all. And the people are animals trying to destroy what doesn't look like them. This was first done in the greatest of all horror stories, Frankenstein. One of the most important stories in the history of storytelling. This technique is also the key to Shape of Water, Get Out, and District 9. And in television, Les Revenants. Now, the action story is a modern outgrowth of the myth form. Action stories include Taken, which is written by Luc Besson. The Bourne stories, John Wick, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the James Bond stories, and Die Hard. Action stories show characters fighting over a goal. Fighting is the key word there. But it's really about how to be successful in life and what you will do to get that success. In other words, a transcendent action story is really about choosing between being great and being good. It's a tough choice. The key question in action is freedom versus life. Do you stand and fight or flee to fight another day when the odds are more in your favor? The hero always chooses to stand and fight for freedom and what he or she believes in. The main way to transcend action is to write an epic. Now, the technical definition of an epic is a story in which the fate of the nation is determined by the actions of a single individual or family. So the action epic is the biggest story, success story of all, because it's about the making of a nation. The key technique for transcending action: place your hero at the fulcrum point of the nation. so that her choices determine its future. Direct connection there. And then make her choose between success and morality. I talk about the keys for writing an action epic on page 92 if you are at all interested. I'm going to slip those in the whole time, so get used to it. I couldn't help it. Myth is the foundation of more blockbuster movies than any other form. But it's almost always connected to one or two other genres, and this serves to update and unify the myth form. Myth form is the oldest of all forms. Myth stories include Avatar, The Avengers, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Orfeo Negro. This is the most popular form worldwide there is, by far. Now, myth appears to be about superheroes fighting supervillains, but it's really about the life process. How do you gain immortality in the limited time we have on this earth? The key question in myth is, what is your destiny? What were you born to do? It says that immortality in this life comes from developing your deepest capabilities and then bringing that to the world. And myth says if you can do that, you'll have a fulfilling life that will leave a legacy long after you're gone. That is your immortality. For example, in the revolutionary film Avatar, we see the hero move from male warrior to a character reborn as bringer of the female myth. Now, I consider female myth to be one of the most exciting transcendent story forms today. Female myth was wiped out from Western culture about 3,000 years ago, and it's been a huge loss. But in just the last 15 years, it's coming back big time. We all happen to be the beneficiaries of living through two revolutions in story. First is the rise of television as an art form, and it is the most dominant art form in the world right now. Has been for 20 years. Second one is the rise of the female myth. I believe it will be a major force in worldwide storytelling for decades to come. Examples include Inside Out, Gravity, Arrival, and major elements of Avatar. Let me give you a caution if you're interested in this form of story. Female myth is not doing the male warrior myth with a female lead. For example, Wonder Woman is not a female myth. No, female myth uses an entirely different set of story structures. And one of the key techniques to it, but one of many, is that we have a character who learns how to succeed by diffusing violence, not by applying it. I break down the female myth starting on page 145. By the way, I teach classes all over the world. There is no subject that writers have been more interested in over the last 5 years than female myth. It's wide open, and it's going to be huge. A memoir is a true story in which the author recalls certain events of her life. Examples include Year of Magical Thinking, The Blind Side, Girl Interrupted, Eat, Pray, Love, and Une Belle Course, which is technically a coming-of-age story, but it's done as a memoir. A coming-of-age story shows how a person's essential character was formed. And when it's usually done, it's done showing a teenager becoming an adult. But the fact is, it can show a person at any age of their life. when they come to that great insight, who am I and how did I get to this, to be this person? Examples include The 400 Blows, Zéro de conduite, Le souffle au cœur, Au revoir les enfants, Coda, Moonlight, Cinema Paradiso, and La faute à Fidèle. Now here's the great truth about these two forms. Memoir and coming of age are not about the past. That's what everybody thinks. No. They're about creating your future, which is why I recommend that at some point in your life, write your memoir. It's the best thing you could do for yourself, for going forward, not for looking back. The key question in memoir, what made my life unique and valuable? The key question in coming of age, what are the key forces that made me who I am today? A memoir is already a transcendent story form because it's about looking at your life thematically. It's about seeing the psychological and moral forces that shaped who you are. And that's why one of the best ways to write a great memoir is to begin by listing the 10 most important moral decisions you made in your life. Because when you do that, and you see the moral pattern there, that's when you'll begin to know who you really are. And one of the best techniques for transcending coming of age is found in Cinema Paradiso and Au revoir les enfants. Match the character to the community. Character to community. If you can connect the evolution of the hero to the evolution of the community, you will universalize the character and show its effect on the larger society. That's power. Science fiction shows social and universal evolution. So it's usually an epic. And this is why science fiction is sometimes referred to as social philosophy in fiction form. Science fiction stories include Dune, I, Robot, The Handmaid's Tale, Ex Machina, Fantastic Planet, and Inception. Now, science fiction isn't just about the technology that determines our lives. It's really about how do you create a free society or avoid an enslaving one. The key question in science fiction, how do you create a better world? Now, to transcend science fiction, you can't just do a big adventure story in outer space. You have to give the reader a new moral vision of how the world works and how it can grow. That's really ambitious. A new moral vision. For transcendent science fiction, we usually combine it with myth, because myth has the longest growth arc of any genre. And this is a powerful combination, these two. And this means, among many other things that will be involved in your story, the hero has a cosmic self-revelation, which means they have a new moral vision of how the entire society should act in the future. Now, let me tell you, I've worked with a lot of writers who try to write this story. What they do is they write the story, they get to the end when this character is going to have this cosmic self-revelation, and they suddenly realize, I have no clue what this moral vision for what the entire society should act differently in the future. So think about that first, not last, because that's the big challenge. Basically what we're saying is if you're going to do this kind of story, you're doing Moses in space. It's a hell of a concept, hard to pull off. Now, I happen to tell you how to transcend science fiction by combining it with myth on page 225. Now, crime is a broad category of stories that puts less emphasis on detecting the criminal, which is a detective story, and more on the battle between criminal and lawman. Examples include The Usual Suspects, Pulp Fiction, Fargo, In Bruges, Breaking Bad, À bout de souffle, Lupin, Engrenage, Brockwell, and Rafifi. It's a very popular form in France, and many great films come from this genre in France. Now, crime is not about cops and robbers. It's about the legal and moral code in the society, and how breaking one or both of those codes can bring everyone down. The key question in crime: who is allowed to live above the law? Now, the best crime stories are about moral accounting, also known as karma, which is essentially what you owe versus what you are owed in this life, but with life and death stakes. Now, one of the best techniques for transcending the crime story is to place in conflict what is legal versus what is moral. They are not the same. And luckily, I explain how to do that on page 250. Now, with the exception of horror, comedy is the most underestimated of all the genres. Examples include Wedding Crashers, Little Miss Sunshine, the satire, La Règle du Jeu, the farce, La Cage aux Folles, also traveling angel comedies. This is a subgenre of comedy, like Intouchable, Le Fabuleux Destin d'Amélie Poulain, Les Choristes, Bienvenue chez les Ch'tis, and Boudou Saved from Drowning. Yes, you notice that French are extremely good at traveling angel comedies, the best in the world. And I have never seen a traveling angel comedy that failed at the box office. Audiences love them. Love them. Now, comedy isn't just about being funny. While all other genres are about how the world works, whether positively or negatively, comedy is about how things don't work. And yet somehow, everything turns out better in the end. The key question in comedy: do you lie or show your true self? Comedy shows the facades that people put up to try to be more successful at work or in love. And then over the course of the story, it's about stripping those facades away to see who you really are. Now, there are two main ways of transcending comedy: satire and black comedy. Satire is the comedy of beliefs. Black comedy is the comedy of illogic and destructive systems. Each shows a character trapped within a destructive system. Now, if you want to write these challenging forms, and this is comedy at the highest level, I explain how to do that on page 309. I know you're getting these page numbers down. The Western is America's creation myth. It's not about gunfights in the street, black hats versus white hats, and it's certainly not the true story about how America was made. It's about the American creed, which says that no matter where you were born, you can be anything you want to be as long as you are willing to work hard enough for it. Now, the key question in the Western is, will you make the sacrifices required to build a home and a nation? You transcend the Western with the anti-Western. which is about how the corporation has stolen what the individual has made. Now, to transcend the Western for today's market, step one is to set the story in outer space. Why? Why would we do that? It's because that way you recreate the physical conditions required to even tell a Western. It's got to be set in a wilderness of some kind. It's really hard to find that on Earth now. So we go to outer space. Once you do that, you then do a rise and fall story. The gangster story is the direct descendant of the Western. If the Western is about the rise of the American dream, the gangster is about the corruption of the American dream. And even larger, the corruption of capitalism and the republic. So this is a huge form and extremely modern. It is as accurate a depiction of what every Western democracy, I will admit it, especially my own, is going through at this time. The key question in the gangster story is, can you escape the slavery of desire and money? Now, transcendent gangster stories say that capitalism is inherently corrupt, and it's inevitable that money will buy and destroy the republic. A great technique for transcending gangster was used in Goodfellas. You combine the gangster story with the black comedy form. These are two forms that we normally think is very different from each other, gangster and black comedy, but they're perfect. Because when you do that, you highlight the destructive system that will destroy everyone within it. And that's what the gangster or mafia system is all about. And I explain how Goodfellas does this on page 379. Now, if horror shows personal devolution, everything shutting down, fantasy is the opposite. It shows personal and social evolution, everything opening up. Examples of fantasy include Harry Potter stories, La Belle et la Bête, A Game of Thrones, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Now, fantasy isn't just about exploring beautiful imaginary worlds. It's really about finding the magic in the world and in ourselves so we can turn our life into art. So the key question in fantasy is, how do you live with style and freedom? How do you make life itself a work of art? It's one thing to survive, but why not live? Why not live as an art form? That's fantastic. That's why fantasy is so popular. Now, to transcend fantasy, we want to increase the social possibilities. Notice you're going to expand the fantasy to the level of the society. What that means is you're going to show the hero taking a journey through an entire stage of society or through a type of government. The classic examples of this are Gulliver's Travels, Alice in Wonderland, It's a Wonderful Life, The Truman Show, and Pleasantville. Now, one of the best techniques for transcending fantasy is to contrast within the same story your vision of utopia and dystopia. These are the key techniques in fantasy, utopia and the dystopia. What we mean by that, these are your views of the best and worst possible societies. I explain how to write the Paradise on Earth fantasy, page 435. A thriller is a detective story in which the detective, or just an average person acting like a detective, becomes the victim and is in great danger. If you were to break it down, you'd see that it's really a combination between the detective form and the horror form. But it's become its own unique genre. Examples include Les Diaboliques, Ne le dis à personne, Boîte Noire, Michael Clayton, Silence of the Lambs, and The Sixth Sense. By the way, the reason I'm giving you as many examples as I can of these different genres is that there are certain families of genres. So I've been talking about, for example, a number of genres in the crime family. There's crime, there's detective, there's thriller, and there's gangster, which means that they have certain similarities, but they have some crucial differences. It's very important to know which one you're doing in that family. Because if you choose the wrong genre to express the idea, it can be a disaster. That's why I want to give you film examples that you recognize. You say, oh, that's a crime story, or that's a thriller, but that's a detective story. They're very different, even though they share certain similarities. Now, thriller isn't about murder. It's about investigating the truth, even when it puts your life in danger. The key question in thriller, is your suspicion justified? The best way to transcend the thriller is to write an epic thriller. Now, as you can see, epic and thriller exist on opposite ends of the genre spectrum. Epic is huge. It's about the fate of the nation. Whereas thriller is about an individual in an ever-tightening box, very small. To write an epic thriller, you begin by placing the story within a small town. As a result, the family, thrillers usually take place within a family. The family stands for the nation. And as the story plays out, you want to expand it to a critique of modern consumer culture. I'll show you how to do this on page 487. The detective story or mystery is the first genre in the crime family. Classic detective stories include, and notice how these are very different from the crime stories I told you about in the thriller stories. Knives Out, LA Confidential, Chinatown, Murder on the Orient Express. Now, detective stories are superficially about who done it, who killed that person. But on a deeper level, they show us how to think successfully. And they do that by comparing different stories to learn what is true. So this is a huge form, very advanced when you take it as far as you can. The key question in detective is, who is the good character and who is the bad character? Or who is innocent and who is guilty? And here's another key point. In any genre story you write, take the key question as far as you can push it. If you did that in a mystery, whose guilt would the detective question? Her own. And yet most detective stories never go that far. It's a major flaw. And this leads to another key point. The detective questioning her own guilt for the crime is one of the most important beats of the transcendent detective story. And I talk about this crucial beat when I talk about cosmic detective stories, very challenging form, on page 485. Examples of this form: Oedipus Rex, the first, to this day, greatest detective story. Hamlet is actually a detective story. Maltese Falcon, Vertigo, LA Confidential, L'année dernière, à Marienbad. All very advanced, transcendent detective stories. And finally, we talk about love, the most choreographed of all story forms, and the only genre with two main characters. Love story examples include Les Enfants du Paradis, Pepe le Moco, Julie Jim, L'Arnaqueur, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, When Harry Met Sally, and 500 Days of Summer. Now, love story appears to be about two people building the emotion of love, and that certainly happens and is very important. However, the real love story is how happiness comes from mastering the moral act of loving another person. The moral act of loving another person. In other words, how each person learns to sacrifice individually so they can create their best life together. That's a tough lesson to learn. And that is also the life philosophy of the love story form. The reason love is one of the most popular genres in the world is because it gives us the recipe for day-to-day happiness. There is nothing bigger or more important than that. The key question in love is, how much can you love? To transcend love, again, you need to take the key question as far as you can. So it's how much can you love, first of all, in spite of all outside opposition? How much can you love in spite of all differences between the two people? And how much can you love in spite of any mistakes that each makes to the other? Which is why all really good love stories are about trust, which is the belief that the lover will not hurt you. And all good love stories are about forgiveness, which is what you have to do when they do hurt you, and they will, because they're human. I discussed the difficult challenge of writing the transcendent love story on page 537. In my opinion, the most difficult story to write. Transcendent love story, they almost do not exist in the world today. And we can talk in Q&A about why that might be so. I said at the beginning that genres do something quite remarkable. Their biggest secret and their greatest power is that they form a ladder of enlightenment based on the life philosophy that each expresses through its theme. By working through each of these genres, in the order they're explained in the book, you too will undergo character change. And you'll move to higher levels of realization and maybe, if you're lucky, even get to some sense of enlightenment. Now, I realize that's some powerful wisdom. But there's one more thing I want to tell you. The highest step of the ladder is to use all of these life philosophies together. They're all part of creating a rich life for yourself. So my final piece of advice, if I can be so bold, master the genres to tell a great story and then apply them to your own life story. And yes, there is one more thing. Forgive me, but you can purchase the book at this URL, and I think it will be available in the back afterwards. And with that, I thank you so much for having me.
On va passer au Q&A, aux questions-réponses, pendant 45 minutes avant que vous puissiez acquérir le livre. Je crois que le message a été assez clair. Et éventuellement le dédicacer. Voilà, attendez que le micro vous parvienne parce que comme on enregistre ce soir, ça nous permettra d'entendre sur la bande-son vos questions. Une première question sur la gauche.
Hello, sir. Thank you for your amazing conference. I just had a question or a couple of questions. What do you make of the musical and melodrama genres as well? Even though I mean, for the past, ever since the 60s, there's been talks about the musical genre being dead, and sometimes we talk of a revival thanks to Chicago, La La Land. And also, what do you think about the difficulties of writing good stories nowadays when we've seen them all, or there is pressure from the studio system to develop more and more franchises in order to, instead of taking risks? Thank you.
Well, certainly the musical is not dead, but it is not in the level of these other 14. This is what, for example, why I didn't include it in the book. Occasionally we get examples of really extraordinary use of the musical, breaking the genre and so on. La La Land is a perfect example of it. It's really quite a great film, I think. But for various reasons, it's very hard to be popular with a worldwide audience with the musical. Melodrama is such a broad form that it's not really considered technically a genre. That's why it's not included also. You'll notice that drama is not one of the 14. Drama is a form of story, but it's so broad that it's not technically considered a genre. Let me give you an example of why. Each one of these genres, these 14 genres, has a predetermined hero, predetermined main opponent, set story beats that will always be there. And drama doesn't have any of that. Anyone can be the hero in a drama. Anyone can be the opponent in the drama. And it's a much looser form than the technical genres. So there's no real set beats for what is going to happen in the story. Now, it is a tremendously powerful story form. It is notorious for having almost no plot, but having a tremendous amount of emotion. So, one of the main techniques that writers will use when they're trying to transcend the genre is they'll get the benefits of plot from the genre, but they'll bring in drama techniques, because drama techniques give you greater emotion. I mean, genre, there's also the word generic. And this is why I was talking, it's so important to transcend each form, because otherwise you're just being generic. You're writing the same story everyone else in that genre is writing. But drama techniques are one of the ways you do it. Now, just to give you some examples of elements of the drama form, it tends to take place within the family. So memoir, for example, is a drama story told from a person's point of view as they're remembering what happened in the past. And memoir, if it's just done as a simple memoir, has a real problem with plot. And this is why one of the techniques that writers use when writing memoir is they'll add a detective story. They will have a character, the author, who is also the character, who doesn't come from the point of view, well, let me tell you what happened. They come from the point of view, what happened? I need to investigate my life. And immediately it gives you more plot. Now, in terms of the example of the question about these franchises, certainly in the U.S., there's no place that does it worse than we do. That is what Hollywood does now. I was interviewed by a gentleman from Le Figaro the other day, and we talked about the fact that Hollywood doesn't care about the Oscars now. The Oscar movies are almost all independent, quote, art films. Have you noticed that? Has been for a few years now. That's because Hollywood used to care if they got nominated for Oscars, if some of their films got nominated for Oscars. Not anymore. They're too busy making money from these franchises. The problem is that these things are getting really boring, right? They're hitting this myth form, they're hitting the same beats, and they're really having trouble transcending the forms. So this is one of the reasons why Hollywood is in very big trouble right now. There are a lot of reasons that we don't need to go into, but that's one of them. And I don't think they have a clue of what the solution is.
Question suivante.
Hi, with the exponential growth of streaming platforms and all the offer that we have way more shows. What does it change for a writer? Does it just change that does it just make that we have more opportunities, or do we have to be more, I don't know, precise or specific in our writing?
It is a two-edged sword. It does give more opportunities. One of the things that happened with COVID was nobody had any choice except to watch television. And so Hollywood went nuts, especially Netflix and Amazon. They were creating these shows really fast, and they no longer worried about a writing staff, which was the key to the greatness of American television up until then. I've written on a writing staff, and it is incredible. You're getting some of the best story minds in the world in the same room, working on not only individual episodes, but connecting those episodes to build a season. And this is one of the reasons that television has, at least until fairly recently, and I think still now, but not as much, has dominated film. Because you had a writer-driven story form. Now, the problem was they got drunk with success. They were just putting shows out there, and the showrunners didn't have any experience on a writing staff. They just had an idea. Okay, go make it. So I don't know if you've noticed it, but I've noticed that the quality of television has gone down. It's not gone down a lot, but it's gone down. And partly because you can't make that many stories and keep the kind of level that you had in what I consider the golden age of television, is certainly in the US when you had shows like Breaking Bad and Mad Men and so on, even Game of Thrones. These are some of the greatest shows in the history of television. But that's very hard to reproduce that now with the structure that TV has done in the States with streaming. So it's also, to answer your question, there is a different story structure to these shows. We, for example, in the States, we used to have two forms, drama, sitcom. And sitcom was basically a 22-minute joke machine. Well, not on streaming it isn't. You go a whole episode, there's no joke. There's no ha-ha, you know. So that means it's a different kind of comedy. It's known as serious comedy. And that has some real advantages. But as a writer, we have to know that the story structure for that type of comedy is different than the story structure that it was when I was writing a sitcom. You have to know the subgenre of the form that you are writing. You have to know the beats, and you have to know how to transcend it. Because the one advantage to streaming is that unlike network television where you just had a few networks and you had to get an audience of 18 to 25 million people a week, you know, that means you're going to get a very narrow form of storytelling. And in the fact of drama in the US, that meant you had a doctor show, you had a lawyer show, you had a cop show. That's all we had, right? If all you knew about the US was watching network TV, you'd think there were only 3 jobs in the US, right? You're either a doctor, a lawyer, or a cop, right? It's because those are repeatable stories that have they don't build in a season. So that's totally changed, and that's made for greater television, but that's also, and so the streaming has meant that we don't have to get 20 million people for the audience, so we can get things like White Lotus that is going to appeal to a much narrower audience, but you got a chance to really write some great television there. But again, it comes down to craft. Your only shot in that competition, and again, it's worldwide television competition now, your only shot is to be so good at craft and so good at transcending your genre that you can compete with anybody out there.
Can you give some examples of subgenres?
For example, well, the easiest place to see where the subgenres are is to go to Amazon. Because in any of the categories, for instance, take love story. One of the category subgenres is paranormal love story. Another one is reverse harem. Reverse harem. This is a subgenre now, and it's hugely popular. They're multiplying at such a speed that I cannot keep track of them. But this is another huge development in storytelling worldwide. The internet has caused some real problems for traditional film and television, but it has been a boon to novelists because the indie novel world now is massive. Writers are realizing, why do I have to give 90% of what this book is going to make to a publisher when I can put it on Amazon and have a 100% chance of getting it published because I put it on there, right? And I get 100% of the take. Now, that also means you got to do all the marketing. And there's a lot of tricks to that. But the point is, it's been a tremendous democratization of storytelling. It puts you in the driver's seat. But what that means is, among other things, if you're going to market your own book, you got to know what genre it is, you got to know what subgenre it is, and you've got to know how to transcend that subgenre so that you stand out from everyone else doing that subgenre. So in that sense, you're breaking it down even into smaller and smaller groups, which means you're breaking down the audience, right? There's only so many people going to read paranormal romance. But believe me, there's a lot of people worldwide out there who will. So it's not that big of a problem. You may not be the top-selling novelist in the world, but these people are making a tremendous living. It just means that you got to do everything.
Hello. When it comes to genre mixing, there's also the notion of tone switching and how to make it as smooth as possible.
What you say? Term switching? What is
tone
switching?
Tone
yes.
switching, yeah.
Okay.
And it seems to me that American movies are not doing it as well as, for example, South Korean movies. And Bong Joon-ho, who manages to switch tones relatively well.
Yeah.
And as an example, Mikey 17 recently was a big flop in the US, for example, because they couldn't characterize it.
Right.
So when it comes to mixing genres, I guess you still have to be categorized in one principal genre.
Yes.
And what do you think about
Thank you for asking that question, because it allows me to answer what I mentioned earlier in my presentation, which is, here's the problem with mixing genres. When you sell the story, it has to be easily identified as one genre. That's how the audience is, the only way the audience, and by the audience I don't just mean readers, I mean producers, studios, networks. It has to be perceived as this is one genre. This is a thriller, right? So here's the trick. You sell it as one genre, but you write it as multiple genres. So how do you know what that one genre is that you're going to call it and you're going to sell it? This comes from mixing genres, which sounds easy. Well, just put those four together. What was Star Wars? Science fiction, fantasy, myth, Western. No problem. Put them all together, you got Star Wars. Except it's not that easy. The problem when you mix genres, if you don't know what you're doing, is that, remember I said that every genre has a predetermined hero, predetermined opponent, set story beats, anywhere from 15 to 20. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, you just put those all together, you have too many heroes, too many opponents, and way too many story beats. This is why the key to mixing genres and to eventually selling the story, pick a primary genre. Pick one genre that you think is most basically what this story is. That is going to be the foundation genre. That tells you who is my hero, who's my main opponent, and what are the main story beats that must be in that story. Then you take the story beats from the other genres and add them where they fit, where they support the main story beats. If they contradict the main story beats, just leave them out. You'll have more than enough plot, believe me. That won't be your problem. But you've got to make the reader feel that even though you've mixed all these genres and you're giving them these great nuggets of fabulous storytelling from a lot of different genres, that it's a single storyline on a single track. And so obviously choosing that main genre to be whatever the primary genre is, that's one of the biggest decisions you make. And then when it comes time to sell it, you've also got immediately, oh, this is a thriller, or this is a love story.
Hello. I wanted to know, do you plan on writing a third book about the anatomy of dialogue?
Well, that's a good idea.
I'm doing business for Elsa Lafont.
Okay, let me explain. It took me 5 years to write this one. Just about killed me. You want me to now go write another book?
Well, I mean, it's the missing piece, right?
I'm kidding you. Dialogue would be a great subject for a book. In my master class, Anatomy of Story master class, I talk extensively about dialogue. And one of the first things I say is it's almost impossible to talk about it because dialogue is like smoke. This is the dialogue at one moment, and then when it's a different scene, different characters, it's totally different. And it just disappears right in your hands. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of important techniques for writing great dialogue. But the problem that I face is that writing books is hard work. And I'm still on vacation from this one. But I will certainly keep that in mind as a good idea for the next project. Thank you.
Hi. Hi. You told us that everyone loves romance, and at the same time during the conference you also mentioned that it was harder and harder to write those types of stories, and the conflict between trust, forgiveness. We know in the industry that there is a lack of romance right now, good written romance. There are a lot in like fan fiction and stuff put on Amazon, but there are less and less romance as it used to be in the 90s or in the early 2000s. So yeah, you wanted maybe to develop on that?
Love story is a huge form, very popular form, but there's a problem with it. There's a few problems with it. One is it's one of the most predictable of all genres. I mentioned in the presentation that it is the most choreographed, meaning we know it's a dance that we know every beat what's going on. And one of the biggest problems with love story is that it is notorious for having very little plot. I always say a love story realistically should take about 10 minutes. Right? Two people meet, there's attraction, rest is negotiation. Right? It's going to happen. There's no plot there. There's no surprise. Okay? So the question when you're doing a romance in terms of a film is you got to stretch it from 10 minutes to minimum 90 minutes. That means you got to come up with plot, and that means you got to come up with conflict between two people who by all rights, when they're just falling in love, that's the last thing they're going to do is come into conflict. Right? One of the first beats in the classic love story is that they have a fight right when they first meet. Now think about how stupid that is. I'm really attracted to you. I think I'll go up and meet you and start a fight. That'll work. No, it's the conventional beats that go into it are highly fake. And yet you've got to somehow translate those beats into real emotion, because it's not just important that we believe that those two people are falling in love. We've got to fall in love with them. So the first problem you face is, how do you come up with a plot for a love story? And how do you come up with a plot that isn't so predictable that, you know, everybody's going to see it a mile away? Now, on the plus side, people who love stories don't care. My wife watches every Hallmark movie that comes out, right? She can tell you beat for beat exactly what is going to happen next. Oh, that's the almost kiss beat, right? They're going to kiss, but no, they can't kiss yet. So it's the almost kiss. She doesn't care. And why? Because it goes back to what I was talking about. What it's really about is not this. It's not that it's a plot system, because everybody who loves that genre knows that plot system. It's a theme system. They love what the love story is expressing. They love to see people fall in love and find the right person and make both of their lives better. And there's nothing better than that. We all know that. There's nothing better. So the trick is to come up with a way that you can transcend the love story. And I mentioned that the transcendent love story, in my opinion, is the most difficult love story to write. And let me tell you technically why I believe that is the case. The classic love story is based on the courtship process. Two people meet. The end point of the story is wedding. A love story always ends in a marriage. They may not be walking down the aisle, but they're basically married. All right? That's the end point of the classic love story. And notice that is a clear end point. One of the keys to great storytelling and good storytelling is you've got to give the hero a clear desire line with a clear endpoint when the audience knows exactly when the hero either succeeded or failed. And we know that in love stories because they're getting married. Success. Transcendent love story starts the next day. It's about how do you sustain love and build love after they've already fallen in love. There is no clear endpoint to that. There's no track to that. There's no predetermined opponent for that. In a classic love story, the first opponent is the lover. Transcendent love stories, a lot of times the opponent is the family, the children, is all the things that make love in daily life very hard to sustain. And so you've got to be able to come up with a clear desire line that can explore these issues of what it means to love over a lifetime. If you can do that, you will be alone on the mountaintop because there's nobody else doing it, at least that I know of.
Hello. First, I want to thank you for explaining the moral argument in your other book.
Yeah.
Big breakthrough for me. Then I had a question about sort of Jungian archetypes. I don't know if you've read Jung.
Sure.
Is there a link between genres and archetypes?
Absolutely.
And are these genres we see here like the crystallization of what humans like, what stories they like? And is there an evolution for more genres to emerge? And what is the link with the archetypes?
Okay, how much time you got here? You want to ask some big questions? I often talk about genres as the archetypes of story because they are story types focused on the plot. The character archetypes that you're talking about are very important to the construction of the story archetypes, the plot archetypes, the genres. Now, where you see the classic archetypes, the Jungian archetypes most clearly, is in the myth form. You can have the father king, the mother queen, the wise old man, the wise old woman. But you also get a modernization of these archetypes, these character archetypes, in more modern genres. For example, one of the major archetypes is the searcher. Well, what is the modern version of the searcher? It's the detective. When I talk in the book about the cosmic detective story, I talk about the searcher archetype, and that is the person who is. But what they're searching for is not just simply who killed that person. It's a social crime and sometimes a cosmic crime that they are investigating. So the point is that these archetypes are very important in terms of, I always recommend, if you can identify an archetype for your characters, especially for your main character, it can be highly valuable. But just as with the genres, we want to identify the genre beats, hit the genre beats, but then transcend it. With character archetypes, don't just leave it at the character archetype. That's generic. We need to individualize the character archetype. So you're going to take, what's a good example? Lord of the Rings, Strider. He is the classic warrior hero. But he flipped it. He's also a healer. The main character in Lord of the Rings. What's the main character's name, the little guy? Frodo, thank you. Frodo. He's as far from the classic warrior archetype who would lead that series of stories as you can get. And because the writer is saying, what makes a hero? Is it the fact he wields a sword better than anybody else? No. He's got a great heart. He's got courage. And he says, when in the scene in the movie when he declares the desire line for the entire series, all these guys are fighting amongst themselves and arguing, and he steps on and he says, I will do it. I will do it. And everybody, I kind of laugh when I see this scene, because it's like, instead of them saying, wait a minute, no, you can't do that. Your chance of doing that is nil. No, they say, okay, I'll help you. Right? Yeah, it's a little too big of a job for me, but if you want to do it, you go ahead. Right? But that's the point, is he's undercutting, he's transcending the genre archetype of who the hero should be. And female myth is another example of it. It is a myth story, but the lead character is not the typical male warrior character with all the baggage that comes along with that. We don't need that anymore in this world, right? We need ways to solve problems without going to war. So this element of, there's a very close connection between character archetypes and genres, and you want to be very clear about what those connections are in the story that you tell.
Il nous reste le temps pour une dernière question. Je suis désolé, le micro a déjà été distribué là-bas à droite.
So I wanted to ask if we can apply all those concepts in this book and the previous one on writing short films.
Short films? Absolutely. But here's the trick. I talk in the first book about the 7 major structure steps. And these are the steps that any character will go through in solving a life problem. And that's what good stories do. They're the steps of solving a life problem. That's why we watch so many stories. Everybody sitting here has seen thousands of stories in your life. Why do we have to do that again and again and again? It's because we want to see, how do you solve a life problem? Right? So those 7 steps are the minimum steps required
to tell a great story. You know, if you've got more room, if you've got a longer story, like you've got a feature film, you got a novel, then you can use the full 22 steps I talk about in the plot chapter. And a lot of those steps have to do with the reveals, which are the key to plot. But when it comes to a short film, you don't have time for all that. So here's the trick. Hit the 7 steps and end with a big reveal. So that preferably a reveal that flips the understanding of who these characters are on its head. Nothing was what you thought it was as you were going through this short film. And then, boom, you've got this reveal. Oh my God. Now, I wish I could give you an example of doing that. It is not, my encyclopedia is not working that well right now, so I can't think of one. But that's what you want to do. You want to end with a reveal because you want the audience going out of your film to go, whoa, I never saw that coming. It's basically the end of Usual Suspects, where you find out that this verbal guy, this wimpy guy, is Kaiser Sose. I hope I didn't ruin it for anybody, but if you haven't seen the movie, I mean, I got no hope for you. But it's probably the greatest crime movie ever made. But that's what you're going for. You're going for the flip, the kick ending, right at the end, tells a complete story, well told, but a surprise that really flips everything around. Let me say, it reminds me of something. Let me just say one thing before we're done. Because I talked a lot about plot here. The biggest reason that writers have so much trouble with plot, it is the hardest thing to learn, by far. It's the hardest thing to teach. The biggest reason writers have a problem with plot is they don't know what it really is. Most writers think, and all readers think, plot is the sequence of what the hero does in fighting an opponent and getting the goal. Because that's what you're tracking in the story. But that is not plot, and if you try to create plot that way, you will fail. Plot is the scheme that the author and the opponent come up with to put the hero in the biggest possible trouble. Notice we're looking at it from the point of view of the main opponent. They're excellent at plotting. And you're just going to ride on that. And that's why the single most important technique I know of that I want to leave with you is when you're writing any story, but especially a detective story, you're writing any story, to get the plot, start with the opponent's plan. Because that will be a sequence of attacks that the opponent is going to put together that are carefully built and carefully connected to put the hero in the greatest possible trouble. And then the hero is going to have to overcome that. And so what does that mean? The more of those that you have hidden away from the reader and from the hero, the more reveals you have. And there's the best equation in the story I know of is plot equals reveals. The more you have, the more plot you have.
Merci.
It's been a great honor to be here, to talk with you. I'd love to come to Paris, and I will come back anytime you invite me. So I hope to see you the next time.